Okay, so that little Hindu creation account, I'll put that in my world religions playlist in case you want to watch that again or share that with someone. But the parallels between the Genesis account are quite striking. We have Lord Vishnu floating on top of the water, having like this cosmic nap, and then out of his navel grows this lotus flower. And we'll talk about the significance and the symbolism of lotuses later on. But out of this lotus appears Lord Brahma. And Brahma is there depicted with three heads, maybe four. We can't see the fourth one looking back. But that's a symbol to represent the omnis, like we would have in Christianity, like God's omniscience, like God can see the past, present, and future simultaneously. So even though to our Western imaginations, we're like, whoa, what is with this four-headed God? It's very metaphorical or allegorical. Very similar, like if you're familiar with the prophetic animals and beasties in the Old and New Testaments. Um, some scholars would argue those are to be taken literally, and others would say, no, those are metaphors or allegories to teach us principles, or God's using these images of, like in Ezekiel, you have the beast with the four heads and six wings, I believe. He has a head of a man, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And some theologians and church fathers believed each of those represented a different aspect of man or of the Gospels. And later we see the Gospels represented by those four beasts later on in Christian iconography. Anyways, I want to get back to, I was giving you a brief overview last class, and I think I ended with talking about the difference between liberation and salvation, or enlightenment versus salvation. And I'll touch more on that later. But once again, just a quick overview of Hinduism. There are three main paths to liberation. These are action, devotion, and knowledge. And I'll talk about the hierarchy of these paths later on. And these correspond with the four stages of life: student, householder, forest dweller, and then finally sannyasin, or like a guru, an enlightened one. I gave you a little bit of history. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Vedas, the Hindu scriptures, of which I read some to you last class. The Rig Veda, this is a composition of hymns, very much like we might see in like the Psalms of the Old Testament. So these are different hymns of devotion and praise to the gods. And there's over 1,000 hymns recorded in the Rig Veda. In the Sama Veda, this is a series of chants, ways to bring yourself in alignment with the various Hindu gods and deities. In the Yajur Veda, it gives prescriptions on sacrifices, ritual sacrifice. And remember, Hinduism as a generic term, I mentioned that that's a made-up scholastic term made by the English when they came to the subcontinent of India, because they didn't understand all these different variations of religious practice. So they put them under the umbrella term of Hinduism. But early Hinduism was polytheistic, this belief in many gods, or at least that's how many people were perceiving it. And just like we see in like Exodus and Deuteronomy and other places in the Old Testament of the Hebrew scriptures, talking about specific offerings and sacrifices for different offenses, that's what we have in the Yajur Vedas. And in the Atharva Vedas, it's a compilation of prayers. Now, Veda means wisdom, and these were carried out through oral tradition. Some people believe going back as far as 2300 BCE. I'm not sure when the first Vedas were actually physically written down. This would have been done in Sanskrit, I believe. But the oral tradition goes back to at least 2300 BCE. And this is why Hinduism gets the title of the oldest of the world religions, even though it is a made-up composite term for the religions of India. For comparison, probably the oldest book in the Hebrew Bible, some people believe it's the book of Job. The Tanakh, or the first 5 books, the Torah, written by Moses, would have been written probably around 1800 BCE. So the Vedas at least have an oral tradition going back 500 years earlier than the Hebrew scriptures. Okay. Now, even though this started as a polytheistic culture, various sages, which are these holy men, a sage is someone who gains knowledge through study, through intelligence, through reading the scriptures, through reason. A mystic, I would define as someone who kind of gains it through personal life experience. And so we have these sages and mystics who, studying the Hindu scriptures, the Vedas, and looking at what they understand about God, come to an interesting discovery. And instead of there being many gods, what they realize is there is only one God. But this God manifests himself in an infinite variety of means. So in Hinduism, on the surface, you could say there's over 1 billion gods, at least a god for every human being. But in the same sense, those are all just part of one being. And a metaphor I like to use to help explain this is, if you picture God or the totality of reality as like a great jewel or gem that has all these different facets on it, well, each facet of this gem would represent a different name or character or mode of God's being, but there is only one God. And so one way people might look at God is through this name of Brahma, or this creator deity, or Vishnu, the preserver, or Shiva, the destroyer. But they could also look at God as Jesus, or the Buddha, or they could look at God as Allah, or Yahweh, or Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, or another facet could be a river, or a mountain, or a tree. God could be manifesting himself in that way. And different humans are going to catch a glimpse of God through these different refractions or different facets of who he is, and that is where they're going to focus their devotion. Now, Hinduism and the other pantheistic religions, for the most part, are very inclusive. So they're trying to point out how all religions are actually worshiping the same God. Even atheists who may not believe in a God are still connected to God by their fascination and perhaps even love to the physical material universe, because that also is God. So everyone is pursuing God in their own way, even if they don't even know it. But for the enlightened, you don't have to get in disputes about who has the true God, because from a Hindu perspective, you realize everyone is perceiving the same God, just through a different lens or different perspective. And so ideally, the more perspectives you could get on who God is, you would get a fuller picture of the Godhead. In fact, even ourselves would be included in one of those facets, because each and every one of us is a means by which God is manifesting himself in this physical material world. Any questions on that? I love this so much. I mean, because it really flips it on its head. Because what looks like a religion with millions of gods, in reality, if you study their scripture and the Vedas, you come to this realization that this is just different ways of talking about one God. But within this one God, there are different persons of the Godhead. And I don't know in Hinduism if it would be like in Christianity, where you have 3 distinct persons, one God. At least the way that creation video I showed you, it was more like this idea of modalism. And that means God takes on different modes or personas as God pursues different activities. So we have God being in the mode of creator. We have God in the mode of preserver. We have God in the mode of destroyer. But it's still the same God, just moving through different functions and realities. Now, if you try to apply that thinking to the Christian Trinity, that would be considered the heresy of modalism. So there is a little bit of distinction there. Both believe there's only one God, but how that God manifests himself either in persons or in modes, I think would be one of those big distinctions between at least the Christian concept and the Hindu concept. Any questions, comments on that? All right, let me talk a little bit about the Hindu Trinity then. So first, I want to start with this concept of a high God, a God beyond human description or understanding. And I believe this is called Piramita Brahman. And Piramita is like this adjective or descriptor of like that which is above or beyond, that this great grand, like we would say meta in Western or Greek terms. And so we really don't have devotees or shrines or temples set up to this being, because this being is beyond even our human ability to talk about or meditate or contemplate. But from this Paramita Brahman, we have the Hindu Trinity, which is made up of Brahma, and that was depicted as the creator. We could make a loose connection in Christianity with this would represent like the Father, but it's not a complete parallel. And then we have Vishnu, which would be very similar in some ways to how we would think about the Holy Spirit. This is the God who is the preserver. He brings goodness and righteousness and holiness into the world. When there's places of darkness, he incarnates himself. And I'm going to show you a slide in a minute. It's called the 10 Avatars of Vishnu, where this aspect of the Hindu Trinity has incarnated into the world in different times. And probably the most famous incarnation of Vishnu would be like Krishna. And you've probably all heard of Hare Krishnas or Krishna consciousness. They used to hang out in the airports. When I went to San Diego State, they would be there trying to recruit, and they would chant their Hare Krishna songs of devotion. But if you tried to talk to a Hindu about Christ or Christianity, it would be very likely that they would say, oh yes, we know this one. We already have this one. We call him Krishna because he is the incarnation of the Vishnu aspect of the Godhead. And just like we have Jesus being an incarnation into physical human form from the Godhead in the Christian tradition. And then last we have Shiva, who is the destroyer. And we kind of have in Christian tradition, the creator and destroyer aspects of God seem to be tied up with one. And our third member of the Trinity would be that incarnation, Christ, where the Hindus, it would be Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But those three are one, and that oneness is contained within Paramita Brahman. And let me just real quick share my screen, and I did pull up an image. Of Piramita Brahman. There they are. So as you can see, the earlier stages, they actually start as animals, and then they progress into like human form. And these avatars of Vishnu were sent at different times. And so first we have a fish, then a turtle, then a boar, then a ferocious lion. I forget what Vaman is. And then we have Raman, and then Balaram, which I'm not sure if that would be distinct from Krishna. And then we have the Buddha. And then the 10th incarnation or avatar, an avatar is like a manifestation from one realm into another. Now you probably know of avatars in computer terms, where when you're in online world or cyber world, you create an avatar that interacts in that realm. Well, in the same way, God picks an avatar in which he can interact in the physical material world of men. And the 10th avatar, who is yet to come, well, surprise, surprise, he's going to come riding on a white horse bearing a sword, and his name is Kalki. So there is like this messianic or last avatar figure in Hinduism as well as in Christianity. Any questions on those avatars? How interesting is that? Kalki, the 10th avatar. Now, I do think it's interesting that 9th avatar, Buddha, when, well, let me remember his name, Yogananda, he was sent from India to the United States to become like a missionary of Hinduism to the West. And he set up several temples and centers. We have several here in California. I think the main one is in Los Angeles, but in Encinitas, just up the coast, we have the Self-Realization Fellowship. And if this COVID thing ever mellows out, I will take you on a field trip up there, or you can go on your own time. They have a lovely meditation garden that's open to the public. I would just call ahead to check on the hours. There's also a really nice bookstore, but there's also a lot of tools or instruments that could help you in your devotion to different aspects of Hinduism. And the people that work there are super knowledgeable, so they could answer any questions you might have on different aspects of Hinduism or different manifestations of the Godhead. And then they actually have a church where they meet, I believe they meet on Sundays, and they have, it would be very similar to like a Christian church service. Although one thing that may throw you off is when you go in, there's an altar in the front, and on the altar there is a picture of Krishna and Christ, and they're side by side. And what Yogananda was teaching was that just as Krishna was sent to the East to bring liberation, Christ was sent to the West to bring salvation. And so he tried to speak in Western terms so that people coming from a Judeo-Christian background could understand what he was trying to say. But what he was really teaching was this Hindu pantheistic worldview that there is only one thing, that one thing is God. You have God within you, and that's why it's called Self-Realization Fellowship. What you're trying to do through meditation and yoga and other practices is to realize the God within. And once you realize the God within, that is when you become enlightened. And you can get off that wheel of samsara. And I did pull up I found a picture of that I want to share since I wasn't able to draw it for you. That's not it. There it is. So this is, if I was drawing it on the board, I would do something like this. Where the fish is, I would have started with like my paramecium, and where the tree was, I went to like an ant. I used a butterfly too. Then I talked about rodents, beasts of prey. And then finally, if you get up to the top, you're coming down the home stretch as a human being. But even as a human being, you still could have thousands of reincarnations that you have to go through before you reach the stage of enlightenment. And I think this would be, if we just took this top piece of the pie here and turned it on its side, that's what this next illustration is going to demonstrate. And this is like the caste system that was in India after the Aryans had come in. And so on the very top, we have this image of Brahma used to illustrate the different castes and to relate the different groups to their functions. So on the very top, we would have the Brahmins, and these would be the priests, teachers, nobles, intellectuals, royalty. It would be the head, the crown of the caste system. Below them, we have the Kshatriyas, and these are your warriors or rulers. And you see it's pointing to like the strength of the arm or the chest. These are the people with the physical might and power to rule. The next group, the Vaishyas, are the farmers, traders, merchants. And I would have made the arrow go a little more towards the belly instead of the thigh, because these are the people that deal like with food and comfort and livelihood and householders. These are your merchants, your traders, the ones that keep society fed, clothed, and sheltered. And then next we have the Sudras. This would be like the unskilled workers or laborers. And that would be like the strength of the legs or the feet or the thighs of that rough manual labor. These would be the lowest caste, and those are the Sudras. And then below them, we have the Dalits, which are considered the untouchables or literally outcasts. They are so low, they are not even in the caste system. And they would have the most heinous of jobs, trash collectors, cleaning out latrines, burying the dead, these sorts of undesirable jobs. So that's a brief breakdown of the caste system. Now, there's many Hindus that find the caste system repugnant, and even within various Hindu traditions, there has been work at trying to reform them. Legally, I believe as of 1948, you were not allowed to discriminate based on caste in India. But it's kind of like civil rights legislation in this country. Legally in America, you are not supposed to discriminate based on race or gender, but you know it still happens. And I would imagine the same thing is true in India. Even though you're not supposed to discriminate based on gender, I mean, not on gender, on caste, everyone knows what caste they're a part of. And if you've met Indians here in the United States, they are probably from the Vaishya, the merchant caste up, because the ones below that, for one, are probably not going to have the means or education or resources to come to the United States. I did meet a Dalit once who came because he was trying to find a new religion he represented over 100,000 followers. And part of why he had come to America was to find a new religion for his people because he felt Hinduism was too oppressive. He felt like certain animals, like Brahma bulls, were treated better than human beings of this outcast position. Oh, I want to add a note here. Generally speaking, if you're not Indian, you would be in the outcast category or below. I mean, you haven't even reincarnated into the fast track of that last rung, excuse me, of the ladder. Excuse me, still smoke particulates in the air. Any questions or comments on that? Now, from a socio-political critique, not a religious critique, it's easy to be cynical or jaded and see the caste system as being imposed by the Aryan invaders. And surprise, surprise, the higher the caste, the lighter the skin, the bluer the eyes, the fairer the complexion, and the lower the caste, the darker, swarthier the people were, like the indigenous people in the subcontinent of India before the Aryan nations or Aryan tribes invaded from the north and imposed their pantheon and religion and language and rule over the people. And so you see this hierarchy, and even to this day, you will notice that often people in the higher caste of India physically, physiologically even look differently than the lower caste people of India. And I think that's really interesting. Now, from within the tradition, we had Siddhartha Gautama, who later becomes known as the Buddha, and Buddha simply means the enlightened one. So it's a title. You could have many Buddhas, but part of his problem with Hinduism was the caste system. And he reasoned, if we all come from God, if we're all come from the one, then we're all equally close. I mean, it's not like we left the one and went somewhere else. We're all still within the one. So everyone has an equal shot at enlightenment in this life. Any human being could get off that wheel of samsara at any time in this life. You don't have to come back again and again and again and again and again until you finally get to that Brahman level where you can be like, oh, goodness me, I am the Lord of eternity and all creation. That the Buddha is saying a housewife or a cobbler or a ditch digger could come to that same realization. And hence we get a break from a lot of the traditional Vedic systems into Buddha's, what later becomes its own religion in its own right. But it started as a sect or a cult of Buddhism. And that's why I said earlier, Buddhism is to Hinduism as Christianity is to Judaism. They both came out of an older tradition, but they saw themselves as like a continuation or a correction of what had come before them. All right. That being said, I want to show you a couple more quick videos, and I think I will couch these below. I'll put the links in my playlist so you can watch them if you want, but I'm going to stop this recording to avoid any copyright issues, and we'll end out today with a couple more videos.